We know them as the titles that have caused a cultural revelation. In 2015, Wild Hunt defied all preconceptions of what's possible in a game. The team behind it, CD Projekt Red, dared to be bolder, to push all boundaries. And through doing so, they set a benchmark that's rarely challenged, even half a decade on. The series has spawned legions of fans across the world and frequent forays into other media forms, including a big-budget Netflix series. From sources barely known outside of Poland, the Witcher series has permeated far and wide. It's sold over 40 million copies and made its developers, who have only a handful of games to their name, one of the most lucrative studios in the world. Yet even more surprising than all this is that it all started with a couple of friends who had no idea how to run a company, or even make a video game. It all started here, Warsaw. Following the fall of the Iron Curtain, Poland was changing. The populace were enjoying a freedom that had been unavailable for decades, and little by little, they were catching glimpses of the outside world.
The world remembers the wonderful principle of the American democracy. Government of the people, by the people, for the people.
Something new to the country were these, video games. Far from a commodity, they were hard to come by, and choices were very limited. Combining his tech savvy with an entrepreneurial mindset, a young Marcin Nowinski began cracking and distributing games whilst in high school. It was during this time he met a like-minded individual who shared his passion for tech and business, Mikhail Kaczynski. To no surprise, the two joined forces and sought to go legitimate. Thus, they founded CD Projekt.
Started with my high school friend Michał, and then right after high school, there was the whole, CD-ROM revolution. Hence the name CD Projekt. Afterwards, so where it's coming from. It's kind of simple.
FMV,
and we were the first in Poland to import games on CD-ROMs.
Their first play was to import software from the US, translate the manuals into Polish, and distribute to small suppliers. Not the most groundbreaking of moves, but it was opening the door for a whole new world of media. Then they stepped up, translating the full packaging. But one factor remained consistent. Every game they worked on was in English. Their dream of giving Polish gamers the full experience, with their native language used from top to bottom, came from an unlikely source, Ace Ventura.
Alrighty then.
Sure, this was far from the most sought-after game, but it was an American title that was completely in Polish. The sales dwarfed everything else they'd put to market. This then was the way forward.
I radzę, nie wchodźcie tam!
Their localization efforts put the two in frequent contact with the American publisher Interplay Entertainment. There were no huge turning points, but ripples were forming, and CD Projekt were showing Interplay that bit by bit, Poland was looking to consume more content. Yet Nowinski and Kaczynski wanted more. The way to turn those ripples into waves would be to localize a hit game entirely in Polish. Negotiations began with the developer of one of America's biggest titles, BioWare's Baldur's Gate, and soon an agreement was in place. CD Projekt could localize the game for a Polish audience, if they did all the work. Baldur's Gate was a big game, far beyond the scope of anything they'd worked on previously, and they wanted to do something special. Nowinski's father worked in a movie studio and had ties with several well-known Polish voice actors. They went big on every aspect. This was far beyond anything they'd attempted before. It wasn't just beyond their own scope. This was reliant on the Polish market being ready for bigger titles. Success would blow the Polish industry wide open. Failure could cripple the company. After much toil, the game was ready, but would the Polish public be ready too? For all of Nowinski and Kaczynski's passion, their games would rarely sell over 2,000 units. To justify this time-consuming and extensive localization, this experiment would have to sell many times that. Thankfully, on its first day of sale, Baldur's Gate sold 18,000 copies. This had reaffirmed two things: the company excelled at going above and beyond, and that Polish gamers were ready for more. Following this success, everyone was in high hopes, and the team were soon in talks to work on another BioWare game, the PC version for Baldur's Gate: Dark Alliance. Working alongside Interplay and BioWare in the development stages, CD Projekt were going deeper than ever. They were under the hood whilst the game was actively being worked on. Creating something that matched Baldur's Gate's lasting impact had become CD Projekt's main focus, but eventually, the team found itself in troubled waters. Difficulties led to delays, which led to some worrying news from Interplay. The project they'd been working on had been abandoned. There would no longer be a PC port of Dark Alliance, Polish or otherwise. Bigger devs may have shrugged this off, but despite their recent relative success, CD Projekt was still far from that. This was a heavy blow. They'd sunk all their efforts into Dark Alliance, and a lot of time and money had been wasted. But the team were nothing if not enterprising, and they transformed what could have been a crisis into a brand new opportunity. The game's code was abandoned, so why shouldn't they just finish it? They opted to continue development on their own, taking the bare bones of Dark Alliance and spinning it in their own unique way, to create their own title. Iwinski and Kaczynski were keen to stay within the realms of a fantasy RPG, to appeal to their Polish audience first and foremost. There seemed like no more fitting setting than the popular fantasy series Wiedźmin, written by Andrzej Sapkowski.
I'm the guy who's guilty as charged.
Yes, you are.
A Polish series set in a conflicted high fantasy world, which told the story of a renowned monster slayer and sword for hire. His name, Geralt of Rivia. The series was already deeply popular in the country, and as it so happened, Sapkowski was keen to license his books to game developers. In fact, he already had licensed Wiedźmin to a developer. Since 1997, Metropolis Software owned the rights to make games adapted from the series, yet any attempts to actually make the title had been completely abandoned. With video game attempt number 1 a failure, Sapkowski had little faith in CD Projekt to make their version a hit, so when they came knocking, he opted for a lump sum as opposed to any percentage in sales. Easy money, he thought, as he sold the license for a flat sum of 35,000 zloty, just under $10,000 US. With the license acquired, CD Projekt began work. But there remained one major elephant in the room. They still didn't know how to develop a game. The company formed a new branch who'd handle game development, CD Projekt Red. In their brand new studio in Łódź, they began to work on this exciting new challenge. The team put together a demo, but whilst their localization work was top quality, this was completely new territory. As it turns out, making games wasn't that easy, and the title they built from the bones of the cancelled Baldur's Gate port, a top-down RPG, would later be unashamedly described by game designer Badowski as a piece of crap.
I found out that there was no communication between the story writers and the team in Łódź, and everybody had their own vision of the game.
The company had put a lot of eggs in this basket, and despite the designers' worries, they still wanted to generate interest in their new titles. Iwinski and Kaczynski took the demo to a dozen publishers across Europe, but no one was interested. It was time to go home. They were demoralized, but not defeated. The Łódź studio was brought back to company HQ in Warsaw. The demo was scrapped, back to the drawing board. This time, they sought help from other developers. They still had an amicable relationship with BioWare, and it was their engine that the game would be using. Having seen just how disastrous their creations could be, they pushed themselves as far as they could to make something they could be proud of. An honourable goal, but it pulled the team increasingly thin. What started out as 15 developers expanded to over 100, costing the company around $5 million.
It was never a business, it was kind of lifestyle, so we're actually pretty bad with counting money and accounting, and when our accountant told us what kind of errors we have in our files. We stressed with Michał for like 2 weeks.
And there were constant other pitfalls to go alongside all this. As they were working off a source material, every piece of writing, design choice, and story direction had to be rigorously thought out so it would fit in with the series of novels. No characters could be changed without angering the dedicated fans of the series. The process was painstaking. Furthermore, they were developing in both Polish and English. It was a monolithic undertaking, but after 5 years of growing pains and development, the game was finally ready. Up till now, the company's scope was set on Poland, but this was their opportunity to go international. Atari had agreed to publish the game, but the Wiedźmin had no draw outside of Poland. Game designer Adrian Kmilarz coined the term The Witcher, and the world was ready to get its first glimpse into a fantasy world that was new to everyone outside of Poland. In the latter half of 2007, CD Projekt Red unveiled their hard work and released The Witcher to the world. From all accounts, the company had come out of nowhere to produce a game which was selling well and causing a stir among critics and gamers. Many were watching in anticipation of their next move, and CD Projekt kept up their momentum. They began working on a sequel, developing their own engine and adapting console versions. Atari were keen to expand the game's success further and began funding the console port. With this backing, the team shifted their focus entirely to accommodate Atari's wishes. They now knew that the size of the project would prove too much. So instead of repeating the mistakes of 5 years prior, they enlisted French developers Widescreen Games to help with the port. Even still, CD Projekt Red's vision proved a formidable challenge. Widescreen kept demanding more manpower, more money, and more time. These disputes slowed the development down, until it ground to a halt. With no resolution in sight, development was abandoned to the particular dismay of Atari, who'd pumped in a substantial investment, and they wanted it back. Problem was, CD Projekt Red couldn't do that. Not only had this failure proved incredibly costly, the Polish economy was also in disarray, following a financial crisis. The company had their back against the wall, with bankruptcy looming. They had one last card in their hand: the sequel. They assured publishing rights to Atari, if they could get it made. The publishing giant agreed, and they resumed production on the sequel, as well as a new engine that would allow for a simultaneous console release. The sequel took 3.5 years, with the team bobbing in and out of troubled financial waters throughout that time. But finally, in 2011, The Witcher 2: Assassins of Kings was ready. They'd kept to their word and allowed Atari publishing rights to the PC version, but their new engine allowed them to port it to the Xbox 360 themselves. The game was heavily praised by critics and fans alike, with sales far surpassing that of its predecessor. Their cut from the publishing deals and the Xbox distribution brought the company back from the brink of bankruptcy, and with their first chance to breathe after years of turmoil, CD Projekt Red did exactly what we'd come to expect. They went straight back to the drawing board. Since their formation, CD Projekt Red had faced consistent pitfalls and difficulties. In just 2 titles, they'd created their first ever game and then established it as a hit series. Yet still, despite this impressive hit rate, their ambitions remained unsated. They didn't just want to create the best video game to come out of Poland. They wanted something that stood firmly on the world stage. Once again, every aspect had to be improved. The world had to be more expansive, the story more gripping, the characters more realistic and memorable, and the technology behind it all had to be on the constant cutting edge. Given how their titles had evolved so far, it's no doubt they'd have found plenty of publishers clamoring to work with them. CD Projekt had worked extensively with Atari, but it was time to close that door, and they would keep it firmly shut. They were ready to push themselves to their extremes, but it would be on their own terms. They'd amassed a tidy sum from the success of Assassins of Kings, and opted to use that money to fund its sequel, with no investment from an outside publisher. Funding the game in its entirety, with no safety net, would put the company, yet again, on a knife edge. On one hand, they'd control every aspect of the development and publishing. On the other, the company had felt the labor of development hell before. A situation like that would surely sink them. For these guys, risks had always been par for the course, but this was their biggest by far. There was debate within the development team as to just how far this ambition should reach. Some wanted to maximize profits, adamant they should dial it back to allow for release on older consoles. But that simply wasn't what the company leaders had in mind. They wanted to push all boundaries. The older consoles couldn't keep up, and limiting the game itself to incorporate them was not something they were going to bring into consideration. By now, the team was 150 strong, but with every intention of creating a magnum opus, the manpower steadily continued to grow once work began in 2011. Over the course of development, the team doubled in-house, with over 1,000 others having a hand in the project globally. But this extortionate manpower was just the tip of the iceberg. This was to be their figurehead game, the masterpiece to put the company on the global stage, and they wanted it accessible to all. The game was localized in 15 different languages, enlisting the work of 500 voice actors to bring to life the script of 450,000 words.
Can you explain this? Are you my foe?
Yeah. Yeah, that one here.
As with seemingly everything else, this brought further complications. Given the sheer scale of the world and its intractable characters and quests, a considerable amount of content had to be written, whilst making sure to fit in with all of the details and subtleties of the original series. Every character, action, and line of dialogue would have to be meticulously studied to ensure that it fit. When the game was announced in 2013, claiming a release date for the following year, it was clear that their ambition and perfectionism may well be their downfall. Many of their systems were incomplete just a few months before their stated release date. And without a publisher breathing down their necks, they pushed back their release date. These delays weren't simply a matter of fixing what was broken, but actively adding in new features to make the game better. Every detail was picked apart, right down to the logo, which was redesigned to unsequelize the whole thing, and make it less obvious that this was the third in a series. Idea being, it would become more accessible for new players. After several delays of over a year, the game was ready. Development had cost over $80 million, but all rights to publish the game remained theirs. After over 3 years of blood, sweat, and tears, the experience they wanted to make, without compromise, was finally available, and it hit millions of unsuspecting gamers like a freight train. The ambition and risks had paid off, delivering a title unlike any we'd ever seen. Upon release, The Witcher 3 received over 250 Game of the Year awards, making it the most decorated title of all time.
And the winner for Game of the Year 2015 is The Witcher 3.
The Witcher 3 wins a total of 3 awards tonight.
This award is for all these 3 Witchers and all of your hard work. Thank you very much.
Within a year, its total accolades would reach over 800. A clear hit with the consumers as well, it sold far beyond anything they produced, shipping 6 million copies in its first 6 weeks. The monumental success of The Witcher from its humble beginnings is an uplifting one. But this isn't simply a story of success. Instead, it's one of perseverance and dedication. So many times during the company's lifetime, they've tried to fly above their station and take risks they should never take. And time again, they've felt the sting of those risks backfire. Yet despite all the pitfalls, the visionaries behind the scenes could simply never accept when it was time to bow out. It's a frame of mind that wasn't just felt by the company's founders, but every cog in that intricate machine. Beyond that, it's a testament to something even bigger. For decades, the Polish people had their liberties hindered. Yet when that grip loosened, the ambition of resilient peoples quickly rose up to create something that resonated across the globe. Wiedźmin and subsequently The Witcher, may come across as unbelievably high fantasy, but at their core they're built substantially around the trials and tribulations felt by Poland and its people. On a base level, the breathtaking vistas, Gothic architecture, and Slavic folklore-inspired mythologies are depictions of the country, its heritage, and its history. But there's something even more. The Witcher is a story wrought with conflict and injustice. The morally corrupt are rewarded, and the just are persecuted. It's a world of constant war, bloodshed, and turmoil. You play as someone shunned for no reason other than who they are. It can either make you bitter or resilient. And thus, the story of Geralt is a story of fighting in the face of adversity, just as it is for CD Projekt Red, and just as it is for Poland. The developers strove to get this message across, and they made something that's standing firm on the world stage as one of the most important games and pieces of media in general in modern times.
The last time I was here, Donald gave me a gift, the video game developed here in Poland that's won fans the world over, The Witcher, a great example of Poland's place in the new global economy.
Despite their success, they kept to their own ethos. They wanted independence and the freedom to do as they choose, and have stood firm in that position. And that's a liberty they believe should belong to the consumer as well. The company not only represents the budding tech industry of Poland, but a bright future for independent developers in a world of huge publishing corporations. Something which was cemented when CD Projekt overtook Ubisoft to become the most valuable European developer. From inception till now, there's never been any indication of slowing down for the Witcher series, or for CD Projekt, and that momentum looks to only build further. Whilst the company focuses on new horizons, we've no doubt that they've unfinished business with the world of The Witcher. And when the time comes to revisit the series, we're adamant that the developers will do what they do best, and create something that's utterly spellbinding all over again.